All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to try to answer a question that I think is really at the heart of anyone who's trying to make something grow.
Go.
How do you know if what you're doing is actually what's working?
Oh, yeah.
And to make it even more challenging, we're going to focus on marketing, which seems like it's got to be one of the hardest areas to figure this out, right?
Definitely. So complex, right? You see a change after you've put a lot of effort into some marketing activity, and our brains just naturally want to connect those dots. But it can be misleading.
Yeah. I think even before we get into the scientific stuff, it's kind of fun to just think of some scenarios that sound like they could be cause and effect, but maybe they're not.
Oh, I like this.
Okay, so Hyundai, they offer their deepest discounts in July, right?
Okay.
But July also happens to be the month that they consistently have their worst sales numbers. So does that mean that those deeper discounts are actually pushing sales down?
That's a really good question.
Right. Makes you think. Okay, another one. Economists have noticed that there's a really strong correlation between the number of sales jobs that get filled in the US and the country's overall GDP. So does that mean that if we just hire more salespeople, the economy will magically grow?
That's a great one.
All right, here's one from a different angle. Imagine there's a survey of restaurant owners in Houston, Texas, and they're asked, how long has your restaurant been in operation? And the average answer they get is 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Does that mean that opening a restaurant in Houston is like a really safe bet with good long-term prospects?
I mean, 10 years is a pretty good run.
Seems like it. All right, last one. Crocs, the shoe company, runs a big advertising campaign during March Madness, the college basketball tournament.
Okay.
The month after, in April, they see a noticeable jump in sales. Success.
Sounds like a slam dunk.
You would think, but that's kind of what we're diving into today, right?
Exactly.
How can we be more certain that what we're doing in our marketing is actually the cause of the things we're seeing, not just stuff that happens to be going on around the same time?
Makes sense. Where should we start?
Okay, let's unpack that Hyundai situation. Lowest sales in the month with the deepest discounts. It's kind of tempting to think that maybe those discounts are actually scaring people away, like they're thinking, what's wrong with these cars? But how else could we think about it?
Well, one thing that jumps out at me is this idea of reverse causality.
Okay.
So in that Hyundai example, it's possible that those lower sales figures in July are actually what's causing Hyundai to offer those big discounts in the first place. They're trying to stimulate demand, get rid of inventory.
Oh, like a reaction?
Exactly. So instead of the discounts causing low sales, it's the other way around. Low sales are triggering the discounts. The arrow of cause and effect is pointing in the opposite direction of what we might initially assume.
So when we see two things happening together, we can't just assume we know which one is causing the other.
Right. Always question that direction of causality. Don't just assume A leads to B. Think about if it could be B leading to A.
Okay, that really flips things around. What about that link between the number of salespeople hired and the GDP? That seems pretty straightforward, right? More salespeople out there selling, more money coming in.
Yeah, it's tempting to see a direct line there,
Yeah.
but sometimes what we're really seeing is simultaneity.
Yeah.
It's true that both those things, the number of salespeople and the GDP, might be going up at the same time or down at the same time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean one is causing the other. They could both be influenced by some other bigger trend that's happening in the economy.
Okay.
Like imagine a period of strong economic growth. Businesses are doing well. Everyone's feeling optimistic. So companies hire more salespeople to take advantage of that growth, right? They want to sell more while the selling is good. And at the same time, all that increased economic activity, including those salespeople making deals, that's adding to the GDP. So they're both going up together. But maybe it's because of a third factor, a common cause driving both of them.
So they're both results, not cause and effect.
Exactly.
Okay, I see that. Now, what about our Houston restaurant example? If you just look at the average lifespan of restaurants in that survey, 10 years sounds pretty encouraging.
Yeah, that's quite impressive.
But what's lurking beneath the surface there?
This is a great example of survivorship bias.
Wow.
That survey, it's only capturing the restaurants that are still around to answer the survey.
Oh.
All the restaurants that opened up and maybe closed after a year or two, those failures aren't included in that 10-year average.
So it's kind of like a highlight reel. It's only showing the successes.
Yeah, it's like only looking at the trees that are still standing after a hurricane and assuming that the hurricane wasn't that bad. We're not seeing the whole picture.
That's a great analogy. It makes the situation seem way better than it actually is. Okay, let's tackle that last one. Crocs runs ads during March Madness. Sales jump in April. On the surface, it looks like textbook marketing success. But what are we missing?
We got to be careful about assuming that's the whole story. We have to look out for alternative causes.
Hmm.
It's true, the ads ran in March, sales went up in April,
Hmm.
but what else is happening in April?
Spring.
Exactly. For lots of people, April is when the weather starts getting warmer.
Yeah.
And what do people want when it's warm?
Sandals, flip-flops, Crocs.
Right. So that sales increase could easily be tied to the natural change in seasons, people wanting those kinds of shoes, completely independent of the ads. The ads might have helped, but we don't really know how much.
So even when it seems straightforward, there could be other forces at work that are actually more important than the thing we think is causing the change. Okay, so we've seen all these different ways that what looks like a simple cause and effect relationship can actually be way more complicated. And that's not just like a fun thought experiment. It has real implications for how we make decisions as marketers. How do we actually get to the point where we can say with some confidence, yep, this marketing activity caused this result? What do we actually have to do?
It's a great question, and the reason why we need to talk about experiments today. But before we get into the specifics of running experiments, let's step back and lay out the criteria for establishing causality more broadly. And it basically boils down to three key conditions that need to be met. The first one, and we've been talking about this a lot already, is association. The potential cause and the effect they have to be related somehow. There needs to be a pattern of them happening together.
Okay, that makes sense. Like if we launch a new ad campaign, we'd expect to see some kind of change in our website traffic or sales, right?
Exactly. It wouldn't make sense if there was absolutely no relationship between the two.
Okay, what's the second condition?
The second one is temporal precedence. This just means that the cause has to come before the effect in time. You can't have the potential cause happening after the outcome you're trying to explain.
Cause has got to come first. Got it.
And sometimes it's not clear which one comes first. Like that salesperson in GDP example, they tend to move together. So it's tricky to tease out which one is the actual driver.
Right, it's like a chicken and egg situation. Okay, now, the third condition. This one sounds like the toughest one to actually nail down.
It often is. The third condition is all about ruling out alternative explanations. We touched on this with the Crocs example. There might be other things that could explain the outcome you're seeing, maybe even better than the explanation you're focused on. To really be confident that your marketing effort caused a specific result, you have to be able to say, it wasn't something else, I've checked all the other possibilities.
It's like being a detective.
Exactly. You don't just arrest the first suspect you see. You've got to investigate, gather evidence, eliminate other possibilities.
Oh. Okay, I'm getting the picture. Now, all of this is interesting theoretically, but we're talking about marketing, we're talking about businesses making real decisions with real money. Why does this whole idea of causality matter so much in that world?
Think about it this way. Marketing managers, they're making big decisions all the time, often involving lots of money. And these decisions depend on understanding what causes what. Let's say you're working on a popular running shoe at Nike.
Okay.
You might be looking at that shoe and thinking, what if we increase the price by 10%? Will that actually make us more money overall? You know, right now it's $100. What if we bump it up to $110?
Interesting question.
Yeah. To answer that question, you've got to figure out, is that price increase going to cause people to buy fewer shoes? Or will we make enough extra money on each pair that we sell that it outweighs the people who decide not to buy? That's a question of causality. The cause is the price change, and the effect is what happens to our overall profitability.
Right. It seems like a lot of marketing questions boil down to that basic structure.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about understanding the relationship between what you do as a marketer and what happens as a result.
All right, what's another example?
Here's one. Imagine you're a manager at Walmart working in retail operations. You're looking at how much shelf space each product gets, and you're wondering, if we cut back the space we give to Tide detergent by, let's say, 25%, will that really hurt their sales?
Interesting.
Yeah, you've got to understand how much product visibility actually drives purchasing behavior. That's another cause and effect question.
Right. There's got to be some examples of this kind of thinking in the real world, right? Companies actually doing this kind of analysis.
Oh, absolutely. Right, there's a really interesting case with eBay that I always think about when we're talking about this stuff. So the marketing folks at eBay, They were spending a ton of money on Google Ads, right?
Makes sense.
For those
Everyone's searching for stuff on Google.
Right. And they were really curious about the impact of those ads. They wanted to know, if we cut back on these Google ads, will our sales take a nosedive?
Mhm.
Like, are we totally dependent on these ads to bring in customers? So they actually did some huge tests where they basically turned off the ads for certain keywords and carefully tracked what happened.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know what they found? For a lot of the keywords they tested, turning off the ads didn't really hurt their sales.
Really?
Yeah. They realized that those ads weren't as crucial as they thought for a big chunk of their customer base. But guess what? They stopped spending as much on those ads.
So this isn't just like theoretical stuff. It can actually change how a company spends its marketing budget.
Big time.
Okay, one more example. Let's say you're managing social media for Facebook
Okay.
and you're looking at your ads. You're thinking, we've got these picture ads, but what if we switch to video? Will that boost our conversion rates? How do you actually know?
Exactly. That's another perfect example. And all of these examples, pricing, shelf space, advertising, the type of ad you use, the best way to get a solid answer, especially when you're talking about serious money, is through experiments. You've got to set up a real test to see what happens.
All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts of these experiments. Let's stick with that Facebook ad example, testing a picture ad versus a video ad. If we want to try to figure out which one actually causes more conversions, what are the key pieces of that experiment?
Okay, so first you've got to figure out who your subjects are. In this case, that would be the Facebook users you're targeting with those ads. Who are you trying to reach?
Okay, makes sense. So we've got our audience. What's next?
Then you've got your treatment. That's the thing that you're changing, the thing you're manipulating. So in this case, it's the type of ad. Some people will see the picture ad, some people will see the video ad.
Okay, got it. And the final piece.
The outcome. What are you measuring to see if your treatment had an effect? In the Facebook example, you're probably looking at the conversion rate of those ads. How many people who see the ad actually click on it and then do something you want them to do, like visit a product page or buy something?
So we've got our people, we've got the thing we're changing, and we've got the result we're tracking. Seems straightforward enough. But you mentioned earlier this idea of the environment and how that can mess things up. What exactly do you mean by environment when it comes to experiments?
Yeah, the environment is basically everything else that's going on that could influence the results of your experiment. Stuff that you're not directly controlling. It's like all the noise that makes it hard to see the signal.
Give me some examples.
So imagine you're running this Facebook ad test in December.
Okay.
What's the holiday season? Everyone's buying gifts, right?
Right.
So your conversion rates might be naturally higher for both ads, the picture, and the video, just because people are in a shopping mood. That makes it harder to see the true difference between the two ad types.
Oh, interesting.
Or maybe there's a big news story that breaks during your test and everyone's distracted and not paying attention to ads. That could tank your conversion rates, no matter how good your ads are.
So it's like stuff outside of your control that can influence the results, making it hard to isolate the true effect of the thing you're testing.
Exactly. And it's not just big events, even small things like the age of the people seeing the ad, how much money they make, what their mood is that day. All of that stuff can influence how they respond.
So how do we deal with all this noise?
Well, that's where the whole art of designing a good experiment comes in. The goal is to minimize the influence of all those outside factors as much as possible. There are a few key strategies we use. First, try to control the environment as much as you can. Like run your test over a short period, maybe a week or two, so you're less likely to get big swings in the overall mood or buying behavior.
Okay, keep it short and sweet.
Mhm.
What else?
Or randomly assign your subjects to the different treatments. So in the Facebook example, you're basically flipping a coin. For each person, heads they see the picture ad, tails they see the video ad. That helps ensure that the two groups are pretty similar on average in terms of all those other things you can't directly control, like age, income, all that stuff.
Right. You want to compare apples to apples as much as possible.
Exactly. And of course, make sure you're actually measuring the thing you're interested in and that you're measuring it consistently. So if it's conversion rate, track that carefully for both groups.
Okay, got it. You mentioned earlier an example of a bad experiment. Just to highlight what not to do, can we revisit that? It was the one where mobile users saw the picture ad and desktop users saw the video ad.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic example of what we call confounding factors. In that setup, you've got two things changing at the same time: the type of ad and the device people are using. So if you see a difference in landing page visits, you have no idea if it's because of the ad itself or just because people naturally behave differently on their phones versus their computers. You've mixed those two effects together, and you can't untangle them.
It's like trying to figure out if a new recipe is good, but you also changed all the ingredients at the same time.
Exactly. You don't know what caused the change.
Okay, so how could we do that Facebook ad test better? You mentioned randomly splitting users.
Right. So instead of dividing by device, you take your whole target audience on Facebook, all those people you want to reach, and you split them randomly into two groups. It doesn't matter what device they're on.
Yeah.
One group is your test group. They get the video ad. The other group is your control group. They get the picture ad. And then you watch what happens. You track that conversion rate for both groups.
Right. Random assignment makes sense. But you also said it's good to measure something before the campaign even starts. Why is that?
Ah, that's a really important point. By measuring that conversion rate for both groups before they see any ads, you establish a baseline. You're basically saying, okay, this is how these groups were behaving naturally. And then after the campaign, you measure again, and you compare the change in conversion rate for each group.
So you're not just looking at the final number, you're looking at how much each group moved from their starting point.
Exactly. And there's a fancy name for this approach. It's called difference in differences.
Catchy. Okay, so walk me through that.
Let's say your test group, the ones who saw the video ad, their landing page visits went up by 10% from their baseline.
Okay.
And your control group, the ones who saw the picture ad, their landing page visits went up by 5% from their baseline. So you take that 10%, subtract the 5%, and that difference of 5%, that's what you're really interested in. That's the effect that's likely due to the video ad.
Oh, I see. You're controlling for any changes that would have happened anyway, regardless of the ad.
Right. Like maybe there was a general upswing in internet traffic during that period. This difference in differences method helps to filter out those kind of overall trends that are affecting both groups.
So we can be more confident that we're actually seeing the effect of the ad.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that there are statistical tests that can help us figure out if the difference we're seeing is actually meaningful, right?
Yeah, that's where statistical tests like a t-test come in. They help us say, okay, is this 5% difference big enough to be confident that it's real, or could it just be random luck? But we'll save the details of those tests for another time.
All right, another deep dive for another day. So let's say we've designed our experiment carefully, we've run it, we've got our results. How do we know if those results are actually good? Like, do they actually tell us what we think they tell us?
That's where we get into these concepts of validity and reliability.
Okay, break those down for me.
Validity is all about whether you're actually measuring what you think you're measuring. Like, are you really capturing the true impact of your marketing effort? Or is something else influencing those numbers? And there are two main types of validity we worry about. First, internal validity. Let's go back to our Facebook ad experiment.
Okay.
Imagine you find that the video ad led to a much higher conversion rate. Great. But what if, while you were running your test, a competitor in your industry started running their own really awesome video ad campaign on Facebook, targeting the same kind of people you were targeting?
Oh, that would make things messy.
Right. Their ad campaign could be driving up interest in the whole category, inflating the results for both of your ads, even if your video ad wasn't actually that much better. That would be a threat to your internal validity, meaning that you can't be sure that the change you saw was really because of your ad.
So something outside your experiment but within the same environment is messing things up.
Exactly.
Okay, what about external validity? What's that all about?
External validity is about whether the results of your experiment apply to other situations. So let's say you run this Facebook ad test, picture versus video, and you find that the video ad wins big time with your target audience in the US.
Okay.
Does that automatically mean that you'd get the same results if you ran that same test in Japan or in Brazil?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
Different cultures, different preferences. Maybe video ads just don't work as well in those places, or maybe people use Facebook differently. What works in one place doesn't always work everywhere.
Right. It's like you can't just assume that what you learn in one situation automatically applies everywhere else.
Exactly. You have to think carefully about how generalizable your results are.
Makes sense. Now, what about reliability? What does that tell us?
Reliability is all about consistency. It's asking, if we ran this same experiment again, would we get similar results? Like, let's say you run your Facebook ad test today, and you find a certain difference between the picture ad and the video ad. Would you expect to see the same difference if you ran that same test 6 months from now? Maybe, maybe not. People's preferences change. Facebook itself is constantly changing, updating your algorithms. Maybe video ads just aren't as novel and exciting 6 months from now as they are today. So if your results aren't reliable, it means they might be really sensitive to random fluctuations or changes in the environment, and that makes them harder to trust.
Right. If you can't repeat it and get the same outcome, it makes you wonder if your initial result was just a fluke.
Exactly.
All right, last thing. You mentioned sample size. Why is it generally not a good idea to base your conclusions on a really small number of participants in your experiment?
Imagine you show your new video ad to just like 3 people,
Okay.
and one of those people just happens to love video ads.
Yeah.
Well, that one person's opinion is going to skew the results like crazy. You don't have enough data points to even things out. Generally, a small sample size means your results are less reliable. It's easier to get fooled by random chance.
Right, like it's harder to see the true signal through all the noise.
Exactly. The bigger your sample size, the more confident you can be that your results reflect what's really going on.
All right, this has been a seriously valuable deep dive. I think the big takeaway for me is that just because we see two things happening together, it doesn't mean we know why. It doesn't mean we understand that cause and effect relationship. And we've seen how tricky that can be.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool is that there are ways to get closer to the truth. Like we can design experiments, we can think carefully about validity and reliability. It's not just guesswork.
Totally. And the stakes are high, right? Like these insights can change how companies make decisions about pricing, product placement, advertising. It affects the bottom line.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge. Think about other areas of your life, maybe in your work, maybe in your personal life, where you see patterns and you assume you know the cause and effect.
Okay, I like this.
Could you be falling into one of those traps we talked about? Reverse causality, simultaneity, survivorship bias, alternative causes. Take a moment to question your assumptions. It's amazing what you might discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.